theyeshiva.net.
Here's the question. Why is it that Yaakov was successful with all of his children? Unlike Avraham and Yitzchak, his father and grandfather, who had a Yishmael and an Esav, who would not continue and perpetuate the legacy and the lifestyle and the faith of their fathers, Yaakov Avinu was successful with all of his children. Mitosei Shlema. All of them turned out to be righteous and wholesome. Was it just that he hit the jackpot and all of his kids happened to be of a different quality? Or there was something maybe much deeper, and there was something about Yaakov's own experience and attitude and avodah and perspective. Another question. When you face adversity in life, what is the proper approach? Is it a better approach to confront it, but ultimately create borders and boundaries and not allow toxicity, adversity, challenge, negativity to affect you, to penetrate you, to get close to you? Or perhaps there's another approach, and that is you see the challenge as your ally. You become aware that deep down, embedded in the toxicity, is an opportunity for your growth. You don't see it as evil. You see it as a catalyst and a springboard for deep goodness. You transform the failure into a springboard for success and rejuvenation. What's the proper approach? Is it number one? Is it number two? Is it sometimes number one, sometimes number two? Can you get to number two without going through step one? These are some of the topics we're going to be addressing in the Shir, which is going to be in a Sicha, a talk, an address of the Lubavitcher Rebbe on Parshas Vayetzei. The Rebbe said this Shabbos Parshas Vayetzei, Yud Kislev Tovshin Chavov. That's Shabbos Vayetzei, the 10th day of Kislev Tovshin Chavov, which would be December 4th, 1965. And it's published in Likkutei Sichos, Chelik Yud, the first Sicha of Parshas Vayetzei. Let's learn inside. Seif Aleph. Al hapo sig Vayeitzei Yaakov Be'ershava Vayelech Harana Isa b'Midrash. On the opening pasuk, there's a Midrash Rebbe in this week, Bereshis Rebbe Parshas Samaches. The Midrash is perplexed by a very famous question, and that is the entire pasuk seems superfluous, and not only that, somewhat perplexing. Why? It already says at the end of Parshas told us that Yaakov Avinu left Be'ersheva, and he went to Padan Aram. It already says that he left. So Parshas Vayeitzei should continue this story. On the way to Charan, why repeat again? Vayeitzei Yaakov Be'ersheva Vayelech Harana. Besides it being repetitive, it also seems incorrect because he already left Be'ersheva. He's not leaving now Be'ersheva. He's already on the road. It says that he left already. Now it should be on the way to Charan. Things happened. He had a dream. He dreamt about the ladder, etc. This is what perturbs the Midrash. Rashi himself raises this question because it's perplexing. So the Midrash Rabbah explains that the pasuk Vayeitzei Yaakov Be'ersheva Vayelech Harana is not a geographical pasuk. It's not here to tell us where Yaakov Avinu left and where he was going. We already know that. Rather, this pasuk is teaching us a particular theme about Yaakov's departure. Isa b'Medrash me Be'ersheva, Yaakov left Be'ersheva. We're not only talking about the geographical location that he left in Be'ersheva. Be'ersheva represents me Be'er shel Shvua. He left the well. Be'er is a well. The source, the wellspring is a source of water. It gives water. From it comes water, flows water. Like a Mayan HaMizgaber. So Be'er shel Shvua, he left the well, the source of the Shvua. What does it mean he left the source of the Shvua? Let's remember, why is Be'ersheva called Be'ersheva? In Parshas Vayetzei, we have a story that Avimelech, the king of Plishtim, came together with his commander-in-chief, Fichel, to make a peace treaty with Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu rebuked him about the well that was stolen from him. And ultimately, Avraham Avinu gives him 7 sheep to demonstrate that it's his well. And they make a covenant and they swear one to another that they will be peaceful terms for generations to come. And that's why it's called Be'er Shava. The pasuk says in Vayera, Kisham nishba'u shneim, because they both took an oath to each other that they will have peaceful relationships. They make a treaty. The same thing happens later in Parshas Toldos with Avimelech and Fichel, who come back to Yitzchak and once again want to make a peace treaty with him. And again, that place is called Be'er Sheva. Vayeitzei Yaakov me Be'er Sheva doesn't only mean he left the city. He left Be'er shel Shvua. He left the place where this Shvua was happening with Avimelech during Avram's era and during Yitzchak's era. Why would he leave? So the Midrash says, Amra Yaakov said, Avimelech v'yomer hishavali k'shem shenishbali skeincha. If I would stay in Beersheba, what's going to happen? Just like Avimelech came to my Zayd, and just like Avimelech came to my father, he's going to come to me and say, Yaakov, let's make a peace treaty, let's make a covenant, you don't bother me, I don't bother you for many generations, like he told Avraham, don't bother me, don't bother my son, don't bother my child, don't lie to us, don't deceive us, don't harm us. He's going to want to, he did it with Avraham, he's going to want to do it with me. No, what's the problem? Make a peace treaty. As a result of that, the joy, the simcha of my child is going to be delayed by 7 generations. What does this mean? This is the Midrash. So the Rebbe explains, Avraham made an oath to Avimelech that he will not interfere with the life of him or his son or his grandchild. As a result of that, the Jewish people could not enter Eretz Yisrael and conquer and settle Be'er and the entire region of Eretz Yisrael with Avimelech's melucha took place because Avraham made a shvuah that we're not going to interfere into your business, and therefore the entry of the Jewish people was delayed 7 generations until the 4th generation from Avimelech, which is discussed at length in Midrash Rabbah earlier in Parshas Vayetzei by the story of the oath of Avraham to Avimelech. And the Midrash says that when Avraham Avinu gives 7 sheep, Hashem says those 7 sheep represent the delay of Jews entering the Yisrael for 7 generations. From Avraham until the conquest of the lands of Sichin and Oig on the Transjordan through Moshe Rabbeinu, 7 generations pass. You have Avraham, you have Yitzchak, you have Levi, you have Kohos, you have Amram, and you have Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Levi, Kohos, Amram, and Moshe. Moshe is the 7th, right? Kol Hashvin Chavivit. Moshe is the 7th from Avraham Avinu. We all know Basi Lagani Achisikala. 7 tzaddikim cause the Shechina to go up to the 7th heaven, and then 7 tzaddikim bring down the Shechina. Moshe brings it down. Moshe is number 7. Moshe Rabbeinu conquers Eretz Sichin V'Oig, which is the beginning of the land of Canaan. It's 7 generations. Yitzchak in the next generation makes another oath with Avimelech, and you know what happens? It extends another generation. Avimelech says, okay, let's go another generation. From Yitzchak until the conquest of the land through Yehoshua ben Nun, 7 generations pass. From Yitzchak to Yehoshua, 7 generations. So this means that the entry into Eretz Yisrael is prevented, yet some more time, and one more doyer after the 7 generations that finished by Avraham. So Yitzchak delayed it yet more. Even though the delay between Avraham and Yitzchak is not so long, because Eretz Sichin and Noig, Moshe Rabbeinu took at the end of the 40 years, and then Yehoshua went in, but still there was a delay. It was another generation from Yitzchak to Yehoshua, and Yaakov Avinu thought, you know what, if I make an oath, Avimelech says, no problem, let's extend it really for another generation. And now the Jews are going to have to procrastinate even longer and tarry, and their entry into Yisrael will be delayed. In other words, Oider Noisef, another generation. That's Pshat Vayeitzei. Yaakov Meber Shava is not talking about geography. Yaakov Avinu decided, I will not take part in this. I'm not interested in staying in Beersheba and being with Avimelech and making a peace treaty with Avimelech and making a covenant with him, and he'll swear to me and I'll swear to him, and what's going to happen? My kinderlach are going to have to delay their entry into Eretz Yisrael even more, because how can I go into Eretz Yisrael and conquer the region where Avimelech is the Melech, or Avimelech's descendants are the Melech? We can't do it. We made an oath, and the oath lasted another generation. It's going to take even longer. Vayeitzei Yaakov Beersheva. Yaakov says, I'm done with this bind, with this crippling effect of the oath to Avimelech. I'm not going to be part of this sort of place where the Shvuah happened. He leaves Beersheva. He's going to be in Chara, and Avimelech is not going to ask for a peace treaty, and therefore the Jews will be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. Before we get to the questions, one footnote. The Matnas Kohuna on Midrash Rabbah brings an interpretation that Yitzchak Avinu did not delay the Jewish people entering into Eretz Yisrael, because he didn't create a new covenant. He just reinforced his father's covenant. That's what the Matnas Kohuna says. Take a look in the other 3. You see? Kepirush habeis b'matnas Kohuna sham parshas hamaches. That Yaakov was afraid he's going to delay it more. Lepirush ha'alef. Sheyitzchak lo ikvam klal. K'lo nishba mechadash rak amar le hashlo ha'gduma she'binesenu me'avicha tehei binesenu al taferesa. V'Yaakov hayim misyare she'Yaakov oid zayin doros. According to the first interpretation of the Matnas Kohuna, Yitzchak never delayed them. He didn't make a new oath. He just said, Avimelech wanted that the first oath that existed between Yitzchak's father and Avimelech should continue in the life of Yitzchak. He shouldn't annul it. He shouldn't rescind it. He shouldn't rescind it. He shouldn't obliterate it. And Yaakov was afraid that he will now make a shvuah and delay it another 7 generations. This kasha is difficult. Yaakov could have done the same thing. He could have renewed the same shvuah of Avraham, just like his father did. Yaakov could have said the same thing. What's the big deal? Why was Yaakov afraid? Yaakov could tell Avimelech, I'll stay in Beersheba and I'll renew the treaty of Avraham. So we're not going to delay their entry into Eretz Yisrael more. Whatever was caused by Avram's shvuah and was maintained by Yitzchak's shvuah will be maintained by Yaakov's shvuah. What's the problem? Why is Yaakov afraid? Beis, b'medrash bereishis zutasham, hagirsehi kashem shenishbali skeincha va'avicha. In Midrash Bereshis Zutta, he doesn't say the oath of your grandfather, the oath of your grandfather and your father. Mizem muchich shegam Yitzchak ikvam al kol panim doid echad. Vavimelech ratza sheYaakov yasa gam kin kvishasa Yitzchak. From this, you see that Yitzchak added something. He delayed the entry into Israel one more generation. And Avimelech now wanted Yaakov should not just maintain the old treaty, he should add something new. In other words, create a treaty with Avimelech for yet one more generation, which will delay the process of the Jewish people going into Eretz Yisrael. The first Pirush of this Kohuna is, Yitzchak did what Avraham did, the same thing, but Yaakov was afraid there's going to be another 7 generations. The Rebbe says it's more logical to interpret it like the second Pshat in Matnas Kohuna. Yitzchak added a generation, and Yaakov was afraid to add one more generation. Tzarech lahavin, we have to understand. Both Avraham and Yitzchak made an oath to Avimelech. They were not afraid that as a result of their oath, the Jewish people's entry into Eretz Yisrael will be obstructed, and therefore they did not relocate from Be'er Shava in order to avoid the need to make a treaty with Avimelech. So why suddenly Yaakov Avinu is the one who is terrified and overwhelmed from fear that he's not going to make a covenant with Avimelech to the point that he has to relocate and leave Be'er Shava and go to Haran? If his father Yitzchak and his Zayda Avram, who cared plenty about the Jewish people and cared about Eretz Yisrael, they, for whatever reason, they were not afraid, they were not concerned. Avimelech wants a peace treaty, yeah. He wants to be at peace with us, we're going to make a peace treaty, we're going to take an oath. For whatever reason, they were not afraid. What happened suddenly in the 3rd generation by Yaakov Avinu that he feels no way? Remember, Avram could have also relocated. It's not the first time he moved. Avram Avinu lived in different places. He was in Hebron many years. He could have moved to Beersheba. I don't want to make a peace treaty with Avimelech. Yitzchak could have done the same thing. He also moved around at different points in Eretz Yisrael. They did not. They felt they could stay in Beersheba. Yaakov Avinu feels differently. Why? What happened? Vayeitzei Yaakov Beersheba, he has to relocate and go to a completely different area. Now, you might answer it very simply. Take a look in footnote number 4. The Yefei Toyer says, he didn't leave Beersheba for this reason. He left Beersheba because he had to run away from Esav and because his father told him to leave to go get a shidduch. There were 2 other reasons he left. The Midrash is just saying, Derech Agav, there was a Gevaldik Maila by escaping from Esav and following the instruction of his father and mother to go get a shidduch by Lavan. There was a side benefit. The side benefit is he got rid of the shvuah. Not that that's why he left. He wouldn't have left. But this is just a side benefit. That's what the Midrash means. The Rebbe says, footnote 4, Aval Mimasha Beberechis Rabbi Shamevi Pirush and Berush Brachas biyachad and Pirush Zeh Mashma shekemersh lefi Pirush and Berush Brachas harei b'shvil Zeh Yatza kein hu gam kein lePirushay me be'eresh shel shvuah kemersh mashma be'matnas kohuna sham ukepashtas lashon hamedrash ve'ein zeh stir lemashmos aksum shatzu b'nei Esav v'chuli kiyaf shalom shatzu machmas kama taimim v'kol echad v'echad memdaya. If you look at the Midrash there, in the continuation of the Midrash, it says another explanation. What's Be'er Shava? Yitzchak Be'er Shava? Mi be'eresh shel brachas. He went away, from the source of the brachas, the place where he got the brachas of Yitzchak, because he felt that if he stays there, what's going to happen? Esav is going to get back the brachas. And that's why he left. Either Esav will threaten to kill him if he doesn't give him the brachas, or Esav somehow will force his hand to give him back the brachas. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that he wanted to leave anyway, but this was a side benefit. No, this is the reason he left. He left because he took the brachas. The language in the Midrash over there is first mebe'eder shel shvuah, and the second pshat is mebe'eder shel brachas. The third pshat mebe'eder shel brachas shelo yamad alai Esav v'yomer li kacha yisem merama b'v'neitel es habrachas v'nimtzeisi ma'abed oisi yagiya sheyaga ba'imei. He was afraid of Esav. Esav is going to attack him and is going to want back the brachas. That's the reason he leaves. The Midrash doesn't mean it's a side benefit. So the same is true in the first meaning. It doesn't mean mebe'eda shel shvua. That wasn't the reason. No, it means it was the reason. And that's what it sounds like in Midrash. Vayeitzei Yaakov mebe'eda shel shvua. What does the Midrash say? He said, I don't want Avimelech to make a peace treaty with me, and that's why I'm leaving. So this means this is the reason he is relocating. Are you going to say, it doesn't say that in Chumash. It says in Chumash he left because Avimelech. It says in Chumash he left because Esav wanted to kill him, and Rivka said, go. And Yitzchak sent him away to get a shidduch. Yitzchak said, I don't want you to take a girl from here. Go to Lavan, go to the house of your mother's brother, and get a shidduch there. That's the reason. It says it's not a contradiction. It could be he left for different reasons, and each one itself was sufficient. Two of the reasons are articulated in Torah Shebiksav, and another reason is articulated in Torah Shebal Peh, and is intimated in Torah Shebiksav, Vayeitzei Yaakov mibe'er shav mibe'er shel shvua. And each one is a sufficient reason to leave. Here is the big question. Avraham and Yitzchak don't feel this way. And Yaakov Avinu feels this way and is ready to relocate. Now we have the opposite question. How is it, Taka, that Avraham and Yitzchak, the patriarchs of the Jewish people, are ready to make a peace treaty with Avimelech and make an oath that they're not going to enter into his territory for generations, and they are not concerned that Klal Yisrael's destiny to go into Eretz Yisrael is going to be prevented, is going to be delayed? Why aren't they scared? So we have two opposite questions. On one hand, why is Yaakov being more diligent than Avraham and Yitzchak? If they're fine, why can't he be fine? If they don't move out, why does he have to move out? Conversely, why are they not scared? Why is it that Avraham and Yitzchak are ready to make such a peace treaty with Avimelech if it can have such disastrous consequences? They're ready to take an oath. So you might say, well, they didn't know, they just made a peace treaty. One said, but Yaakov didn't know. Yaakov knew, so they also knew. So what was the cheshbon of Avraham and Yitzchak versus Yaakov? So as always, the Rebbe is going to show us it's not an issue of Avraham and Yitzchak were sinning and Yaakov decided not to sin. Avraham and Yitzchak, every person serves Hashem according to his neshama, according to his shlichus, according to the trajectory that the Rebbeinu Shalom creates for him in this world. Everybody has the tools and the resources to fulfill their mission. And my mission is not your mission. My avodah is not your avodah. The first two generations of Judaism was one type of avodah, Avraham and Yitzchak. Then we come to a third generation, Yaakov Avinu, where the avodah develops into stage 2. And you can only get to stage 2 after you went through Avraham and Yitzchak. It was two different types of avodas. The one encapsulated through Avraham and Yitzchak, even though between Avraham and Yitzchak there were also many differences, but that's a separate sugya. And then we come to the avodah of Yaakov. Mitzad the avodah of Avraham and Yitzchak, there could be an oath with Avimelech. Mitzad the avodah of Yaakov Avinu, there was no room for such a type of oath with Avimelech, as we will see. Siv Beis, Habiur, Motzinu de Chalukah, Dargas Malas shel Avraham Yitzchak, Dargas Malas shel Yaakov, Eshal Pizei, Yivur Gam Ken Hefresh Yisei Yeshivin Avodas shel Avraham Yitzchak, Lezu shel Yaakov. The spiritual state of Avraham and Yitzchak is different than the spiritual madrega of Yaakov. And this will explain to us a fundamental difference between the avodah of Avraham and Yitzchak versus the avodah of Yaakov. Avraham yotzeh memenu Yishmael, Yitzchak yotzeh memenu Esav. Chazal tell us in Vayikra Rabbah, Parsha Lamed Vav, in Masechta Pesachim Daf Nun Vav, in Sifri, it's all there in footnote 5. Avraham Yishmael left. Avraham yotzeh memenu Yishmael. Who emerged from Avraham Avinu are Yishmael, and who emerged from Yitzchak on Esav. The Midrash says in Parshas Vayetzei, it says, "V'zacharti es brisi Yitzchak, v'af es brisi Avraham esker, v'zacharti es brisi Yaakov, v'af es brisi Yitzchak, v'af es brisi Avraham esker v'eretz esker." By Yitzchak and Avraham it says the word af, which means wrath, anger, not by Yaakov. Why? Because Yaakov mitasi shlema. Yaakov's bed was wholesome. Avraham yotzim memenu Yishmael, Yitzchak yotzim memenu Esav. The same is true. The Gemara in Pesachim Daf Nun Vav. The Gemara says that when Yaakov was on his deathbed, the Shechina left him. And he was afraid, Shema yesh psul b'bonai, maybe one of his children is spiritually or morally blemished. And that's when they told him, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Shem Shem, b'libcha elecha, kachem b'libeinu elechad. Just like in your heart is one, in our heart is only one. And that's when Yisrael says, Baruch Shem Kved Malchus Elolam Vod. That's why we say Baruch Shem Kved Malchus Elolam Vod in Krishma after Shema Yisrael, because that's what his response was to Zer Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. He was thanking the Rebbeinu Shalom that mitas shlema, his entire family is wholesome. Hainu she Yishmael ve'esav, af shahayu b'nei Avraham b'Yitzchak. Yishmael and Esav were children of Avraham and Yitzchak. Because yatsu m'sheichusam la'Vayeitzei v'nifredu mehem. Nonetheless, who emerges from Avraham are Yishmael and an Esav. And the diuk, the expression of Chazal is yatsa mimenu. What does it mean yatsa mimenu? They emerged from him, but also yatsa, like Vayeitzei Yaakov. They left him. They ultimately separated from the intense holiness and life and harmony of Avraham and Yitzchak. He says higiu in quotation marks. The holiness, the sacredness, the godliness of Avraham and Yitzchak and their avodah ultimately did not manage to unread it. Higiu means to reach and to touch. To touch, right? It didn't manage to touch them, to move them to the point that they will be transformed into goodness. Of course, it had an impact on them. We'll soon see. But ultimately, it didn't manage to redefine them into ultimate children, descendants of Avraham and Yitzchak, who carry on their legacy, their emunah, their connection to Hashem. Avol Yaakov Maila Shaloi Mitosei Shleim. Something unique about Yaakov, Maila Shaloi. Chazal say his entire bed was wholesome. His avodah penetrated, it affected all of his 12 children that they should be shleimim. They should be wholesome. And what do we mean wholesome? Wholesome in relationship to Yaakov and his level. Wholesome, each and every one of them perpetuates Klal Yisrael. Each and every one of them is a father of all the Jewish people till the end of the generations, till the end of all generations. Each and every one of them becomes a descendant who carries on the torch and the fire of Yaakov Avinu, the emunah of Yaakov Avinu, the Yiddishkeit, Torah mitzvahs. Each of them belongs to Beis Yisrael, unlike Yishmael, who ultimately moves away from Avraham, and his life, follows a very different trajectory, and the same is true with Esav. Yishmael becomes the father of other nations that are not part of the tradition of Yiddishkeit, and of course Esav as well, the grandfather of Avimelech, etc. Even though all of the Avos are defined as the Merkava is a chariot, and the mashal, it's an expression in the Midrash, and the mashal of a chariot is when I get into the car. I don't have to fight with the car. I tell the car I want to go to Manhattan. The car says, no, we're going to Miami. Or the car says, we're not going anywhere. If the car says, we're not going anywhere, that sometimes happens, but it means it's not a car, it's dead. You got to get it towed. The definition of a Merkava, you go on your horse, you go into a chariot, it doesn't have its own agenda, and then it has to struggle with you and fight with you. The definition of the horse and the chariot is, I am here for you, I'm your facilitator. Vous devils gain, I'm here, hineni. That's the definition. What were the Avos in this world? The Avos were the Merkava for the Rebbe. The definition, the identity of the Avos was not, I have an identity. Now I think the best way to live is to do God's will, or not. Havas in the Merkava means their entire identity was, I am a conduit to facilitate Hashem's will in the world. There's no ego, there's no self-consciousness. I'm just a conduit. Their neshamas are neshamas from Olam Hatzilas. We all know in the system of the worlds, the highest world is called the world of Hatzilas. That's a world in which divine oneness and consciousness and harmony is completely manifest and pervasive. And that is what their souls are. That's how they live in this world. Every neshama comes from Hatzilas. Neshama shenasata b'torei. Every neshama. But every neshama goes through an evolution. The neshamas of the avos retain the identity, the quality of Elam Atzilus. Nonetheless, there's a difference between them. And one of the differences is also expressed the way they serve Hashem in relations to those things that are the antithesis of goodness and holiness. Yaakov asak be'ikir bebirur v'zichur charav ve'fuchil l'toiv l'tamid. Masheken Avraham Yitzchak. Yaakov's avodah was to refine the negativity and toxicity and transform it to goodness for eternity. In other words, to redo it, to a makeover, a transformation, to excavate its ultimate core and essence and reveal that it's good and completely transform it. Avraham and Yitzchak, this was not their primary avodah. V'lechein, af she'asi Yishmael tshuva. V'yesh emrim shekasher v'yaretz Esav l'krasid Yaakov v'yishakei u'nashke b'chol libo l'her l'zakiyah. Even though certainly they impacted their children. Avram impacted Yishmael, and it says that the end of Yishmael did tshuva at the end of his life. That's why Rashi brings that at the funeral of Avram Avinu, Yitzchak and Yishmael went together, and Yishmael let Yitzchak go first. Yishmael did tshuva. And by Esav it says, in Vayishlach, that he runs to meet Yaakov, and he hugs him and he kisses him, and at least one of the opinions is that he kissed him with all of his heart. In other words, there was a genuine transformation where Esav really wants to be close to Yaakov. That's true. But it doesn't endure. It doesn't endure for the generations afterwards, not by Yishmael, not by Esav. The obvious, Avraham impacted Yishmael. He tried to influence him. It was his child. Yitzchak impacted Esav. He certainly loved Esav and tried to influence him, but ultimately, they were not transformed. Avraham and Yitzchak's avodah would not transform the ra into goodness. There was an impact, but it didn't have an endurance because there was no real metamorphosis and transformation. It means that Avraham and Yitzchak, even though they were so holy, and their wives as well, Sarah, and even Yishmael's mother, Hagar, was no small person, and certainly Esau's mother was Rivka. Nonetheless, these children, Yatsa Mehem, they emerged from them, but they also left them. They departed from them. The Kedusha of Avraham and Yitzchak didn't penetrate these children to transform them, to affect them, to the point that they should become a replica and a continuation of the Avos. By Yaakov, his avodah, his personality, his neshama, penetrated and affected all of his children that they should continue his path. Each of them remains a Jew. Yishmael moved on. Did he take some things from Avraham Avinu? Of course he took things from Avraham Avinu. Not only that, it says about Yishmael himself that he did tshuva at the end of his life, but it didn't last, it didn't continue. It's not like he and his family went back to Avraham Avinu and they continue that tradition. And the same is true with Esav. Esav, did he take things from Yitzchak? Of course he took things from Yitzchak, and he loved Yitzchak, and Yitzchak loved him, and he respected Yitzchak. And Chazal say that the kibbud of Esav was beyond le'elo le'elo. There were certainly special things about Esav. But to say that Esav continued the legacy of Yitzchak Avinu, the faith, the monotheism, the emunah, the commitment, the Yerushalayim, it's not the case. With Yaakov Avinu, every one of the children, even though they were different, and even though there were different challenges in the family, ultimately they sell Yosef into slavery. And he goes down to Egypt. There's a story with Reuven, with Bilhah. There's a story of Yehuda and Tamar. There's a story of Yaakov was upset at Shimon and Levi. Yaakov was upset at Reuven. Etc. You go through Chumash, people were asking, in the comments, people were asking, what do you mean? The Shvatim also, they went through different stuff. Emes, there were Aliyahs, there were Yeridus, but ultimately they all remained Jews. Klal Yisrael comes from each one of the 12 Shvatim. There were Jews that came from Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yud, Yisachar, Zvulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Yosef, Binyamin. And Yosef, Ephraim, and Menashe. At some point, most of the 10 Shvatim were exiled, and we lost touch with them. But there's still Jews today from all the Shvatim. The other Shvatim are a minority, not a majority. In other words, all the children of Yaakov Avinu continued the Messiah of Knesset Yisrael. They continued the derech of Yaakov Avinu. They all went to Mitzrayim and ultimately stood at Maimon Har Sinai and began the story of the Jewish people in this world. Each one of them, mitaser shlema. It doesn't mean that different Shvatim didn't go through different things relative to their level. You can't say that about Esav, you can't say that about Yishmael. So there's a major difference here. Avraham Avinu and Yitzchak were the Avos. Ha'avos ein in Merkava, and their neshamas was so great, he says emes. But there was a difference in their avodah of dealing with that which is not holiness. Yaakov confronted the negativity and transformed it. Avraham and Yitzchak did not. So even though Yishmael did tshuva, and even though Esav had his moments, and it says, at least there's one opinion in Rashi and Vayishlach, next week's parsha, that when Esav kissed Yaakov, when they came together after 20 years, it was genuine and authentic. Nonetheless, it did not endure. Ultimately, Esav went his own way, and his story drifted away. So now let's continue inside. 40, see 40, the second paragraph. And even though Avraham and Yitzchak were involved in the avodah of birurim, the word birurim, like the word boired in Hilchos Shabbos, in Orach Chaim Siman Shin Yutes, boired means selecting, removing the good from the bad, sifting, separating. The word boired means to select, also to clarify. So even though Avraham and Yitzchak were involved in avodah of birurim, as the Gemara says in Saita Bavram, ala pasuk vayikra sham b'shem Hashem keilolam. Al tikra vayikra ela vayakri malamet shikri Avraham avinu l'shmei shlakadosh baruch b'fi kolover v'shav. The Gemara says on the pasuk in Vayeitzei, Avraham planted a garden in Beersheva, and he called out in the name of Hashem, the God of the world. And the Gemara says, it doesn't say, it says vayikra, but al tikra vayikra ela vayakri. You could read it in a Sefer Torah, not vayikra, but vayakri, meaning it's not just he called out. He influenced other people to call out. Nishna et alein gerufen. Et gemacht andere rufen, vayakri, al tikra vayikra ela vayakri. That Avraham Avinu inspired every person who passed by his garden, his hotel, his home. He inspired within them the desire and the awareness and the yearning to call out in the name of Hashem, to appreciate that there's a creator, there's oneness. So this is not, Avraham Avinu is not in isolation. Avraham Avinu is changing the world. And who is he changing? He's changing people who are foreign. Even Yitzchak, where it doesn't say clearly in Chumash this notion, but it's explained in Svar that Yitzchak's avodah of digging the wells was not just Yitzchak was looking for water. Yeah, he was looking for water, but Yitzchak wasn't just digging wells. The avodah of digging wells was, it's brought in Svarim that Yitzchak would dig wells, and remember, wells were the central attraction. Everybody came to the wells because you needed water. That's why, as we spoke about this, when we spoke about this in the Shir of of last week, Chayesara, the Maimon Vayachbiru. Yeah? That Eliezer met Rivka at the well, and Moshe Rabbeinu met Zipporah at the well, and Yaakov met Rachel at the well. So Yitzchak created all these new sources of water, and people came, and it was an opportunity to influence them. Also, the concept of digging wells is that Yitzchak was looking for the Be'er Mayim Chayim, spiritually, looking to find the Nitzatz Alaki, the Alakus, that's under the earth, under the gravel. Sometimes you look at yourself, you look at somebody else, and there's just earth and filth. But Yitzchak Avinu says, take a shovel and dig and excavate, and you'll find the godliness, the living water. So Avraham and Yitzchak are not just living in an isolated cocoon, they moved to heaven, and they're not interested in anything that's challenging. They're involved in changing the world. Nonetheless, primarily their avodah, when it came to toxicity, when it came to negativity, it was more about negating it, pushing it away. Their focus was that there is negativity in the world, there is toxicity in the world, there's brokenness in the world, there's immorality in the world. Their focus was, let's not allow it to disturb, to obstruct, to overwhelm Kedusha. But not that they themselves should become metamorphosized and transformed into Tov and Kedusha. Their main matara, their main tachlis, their main purpose in dealing with situations, with people, with circumstances that were challenging the truth, the emes of Avraham and Yitzchak, the main tachlis was to negate it. There should not be opposition, to get rid of the opposition, but not birur hametzias, not to durchtan, to work with the ra and transform it into tov. Mashenkel be Yaakov Vayeitzei charana. Yaakov, the pasuk says, Vayeitzei Yaakov be'ershava, and what's the end of the pasuk? He goes into charan. What's charan? Charein av shalmakim. As Rashi says at the end of Parshas Noach, charan means anger, from the word v'chara af Hashem. Charein av shalmakim. It's called charan because it's so kavayachal, the place of God's wrath, God's anger. He goes into charein av shalmakim ba'olam. He goes into that place where there's anger. And what does it mean, there's anger? It's something that's disturbing. And he spends there 20 years. His avodah is a positive avodah, not just to neutralize it, not just to create a boundary, not just to make sure that it doesn't affect him and doesn't affect Kedusha. No, he does something positive. He works through it. This is the birur. He works through the psilus, and he elevates it, and he transforms it into holiness. To understand this, it's generally the difference between the avodah of the tzaddik and the Baal Tshuva. HaTzaddik ein lo shaychus l'inyanei ra. Ad shegam machshava zora shaloi lahavaya eina nefeles v'machshavti k'mavur b'tanya barucha. Mashenke Baal Tshuva inyanei lafich gam esara l'kedusha v'ad shes doines nasa le'kezachias. What's the difference between a tzaddik and a Baal Tshuva? A tzaddik, and we're talking here about the ideal tzaddik discussed at length in the first section of Tanya. The tzaddik is somebody, he has no connection with it. He has no connection with brokenness and negativity. Even as the Tanya says, even a machshava zara, an alien thought that doesn't belong to Achdus Hashem, that doesn't belong to the oneness of the world and the oneness of life, it doesn't enter his mind because he's a transformed person internally. So his entire inner identity, and therefore his thoughts and his words and his actions and his inner cravings and emotions all belong to the realm of the oneness of Hashem. What's a Baal Tshuva? A Baal Tshuva, we're not talking about culturally what we call a Baal Tshuva, somebody who grew up here. We're talking about a model of a person. A Baal Tshuva is somebody who struggles. And it could be that the struggle is so deep that he actually failed. And he failed a lot. And he stumbled. And what does he do? He takes his ra, he takes his mistakes, and he transforms them into Kedusha, to the point that the Gemara says in Maseches Yuma Daf Pevav, as he points out in footnote 17, Zdoines nasa le'kezachias. Rish Lakish says, as we spoke about many times, that when somebody does real tshuva out of love, the sins themselves become mitzvahs. In other words, it's not just he runs away from sin. The tzaddik runs away from zdoines. He runs away from failure. He runs away from ra. Again, we're talking here, two ideals. Within every person, there's different states and different fluctuations. One day I could be more in this state. One day I can be more in this state. We're talking here about two models, two concepts. How it applies to each person's life. That's kol chada from shura delay. But the tzaddik is somebody who lives in a world of challenge, but he doesn't engage it. He stays away from the ra, and that's an avodah. It's not a small thing. He stays away from it. So he creates very clear boundaries, and even a machshava zara, A machshava zara doesn't fall into it. It doesn't enter into his space. When it comes to a Baal Tshuva is not just a machshava zara falls into him. That's even a beinoni. Could be he fell, he failed, and he stumbled, and he made bad mistakes and bad choices, consciously, unconsciously, deliberately, inadvertently, or both. And now he comes and he has to work it through. He has to find the pnimius of it. He has to transform it. This doinus have to become zachius. In other words, the failure itself has to be transformed into a springboard for a new awareness, for renaissance, for rejuvenation, for transformation. This is just an example to explain the difference between the avodah of Avraham and Yitzchak and the avodah of Yaakov. Avraham and Yitzchak, of course they affected Esav, and of course they affected Yishmael. But ultimately, Esav and Yishmael don't become part of the story of Avraham and Yitzchak. They go their own way. Yaakov mitasish leib, all the children are affected. All the children become tzaddikim. So what's the teichen? Because Avraham and Yitzchak's avodah did not permeate Ra to transform it. Yishmael and Esav were people that had big nisyonos, had big challenges. So Avraham and Yitzchak remained very holy. And part of that holiness affected the children. But to say that it penetrated and redefined Yishmael and Esav, it did not. Yatzim amenu Yishmael, Yatzim amenu Esav, and ultimately they had to go their own way. There was a pirud, there was a separation. Esav had a son Eliphaz. Eliphaz had a son Amalek. And we know what happened there. Completely drifted away. We see Avraham Avinu worked with the world. Avraham Avinu was Mekar of people. Avraham Avinu vayikra sham b'shem Hashem kelo elam. Yitzchak Avinu did the same. Emes. That's true. Nonetheless, just like Yishmael and Esav, that did not have a kiyum. It didn't have an endurance, as we're going to see in a moment in the footnotes. Because even though they were Isaac and Avodah Sabirudim, but generally, and they certainly affected a lot of people, and we know that Avraham Avinu brought back to Hashem so many people, as we'll soon see the words of the Rambam, when the footnotes we'll learn the words of the Rambam. Nonetheless, it did not have the endurance, just like Yishmael also did tshuva, but it didn't endure. In other words, it didn't transform them completely. Why not? Because the main avodah of Avraham and Yitzchak was to make sure that the Ra doesn't affect the Kedusha. That was the main avodah. Yaakov Avinu was a new chiddush. The chiddush of Yaakov Avinu was not just to neutralize the opposition, but to redefine their metzius, to be mevarad the metzius. When Avraham and Yitzchak come to a place of Ra, they back off. They will not allow the Ra to affect them. They will try to affect it, but ultimately there's a mechitza that's created. Yaakov Avinu comes to a place of Ra. What's his avodah? His avodah is, what does he tell the malach when he fights with him a whole night? Lo yashalecha chakim beirachtani. I'm not going to send you away until you bless me. It's not enough for me to get rid of you. No. I'm going to transform you. Beirachtani. I need you to bless me. I need the bracha to come from you. Different avodah. Vayeitzei charana. I'm going to go into Charan. Avraham Avinu doesn't go into Charan. Avraham Avinu runs away from Charan. He travels the world. He leaves Eretz Yisrael, but he goes away from Charan. Yitzchak Avinu can't leave Eretz Yisrael. He's born in Eretz Yisrael and he stays in Eretz Yisrael his whole life. He's an Oila Tmima. Even though he does a avodah of Birudim. Yaakov Avinu goes back into Charan. Vayeitzei Yaakov Avinu into the Charan. Was tust in Charan shel Makam? Yaakov has a shlichus. His shlichus is to go into Charan, which is Charan af shel Makam. It's a place of negativity, and transform it into Kedusha. Not just neutralize it. Not just build a mechitza that it doesn't affect me or my children. He transforms the Ra. When he confronts Ra, he says, I'm going to work you through until you become Kedusha. It's a whole different avodah. And where do you see it? You see it in the difference of the children. When Yitzchak faces an Esav, he could try to do what he wants, but ultimately he'll love him and he'll try to impact him and he'll accomplish things. And Esav will kiss Yaakov with his whole heart. The same is true of Avraham and Yishmael. It says in Pirkei Rebbe Lezer that even after Avraham Avinu expelled Yishmael, Avraham Avinu went to visit him. He went to visit him a few times. I don't know if you know this. A whole mice in Pirkei Rebbe Lezer, he went to visit Yishmael, and Yishmael's wife would not show him any hospitality. And ultimately Yishmael ended up divorcing that woman. And then he marries another woman, her name is Fatima, which by the way is very interesting because in Islam, Fatima I think is considered the daughter of Muhammad. So Pirkei Rebbe Lezer, Yishmael's second wife was Fatima. And when Avraham Avinu came, she showed him hospitality, and he said, now I know this, it's the house of Avraham Avinu. And the Midrash says Yishmael came home and he heard who was there, because he wasn't home, he was at work. He realized that his father still loves him. Fascinating. And at the end, he does tshuva. There's a relationship, there's a connection, but it doesn't endure. Yishmael's family ultimately drifts away from Avraham Avinu's legacy. Because when they confront the Ra, they will try to impact it, but ultimately their job is to make sure that the Kedusha is not affected. By Yaakov Avinu mitase shlema, he also had challenges with his children. Not like he didn't have challenges with his children. It's not that Yaakov Avinu hit the jackpot. We learn Avraham and Yitzchak, okay, it was Nebuch, OTD, kids did OTD. And Yaakov hit the jackpot, Baruch Hashem, all the kids did well in yeshiva. They didn't have they weren't dyslexic, they didn't have learning disabilities, they didn't have trauma. They didn't have attachment disorder. You're familiar with what's going on. They didn't have an issue with self-esteem. Baruch Hashem, nobody hurt them in school, nobody hurt them in the house, nobody hurt them Friday night in shul. They did well in cheder, they were complimented, they were built up. So therefore, mitase shlema. Yishmael and Esav, whatever. Shmuel was ADHD, ADD with many other diagnoses. All day he was in the field shooting animals, hunting. Was willst du? It's much deeper than that. That's what the Sikh is teaching us. It's much deeper. It's not only about the children, it's about the parents. Yaakov Avinu mitase shlema, you know why? Because he saw mitase shlema. He made sure that all of his children will be shalem. Because when Yaakov Avinu confronted a challenge, he didn't run away. He didn't block it off. He didn't just say it's not going to disturb the rest of the family. Yaakov Avinu's avodah was to show that there's no real Ra in the world. That Ra is only there to transform it. It's an avodah. The tzaddik doesn't have to do that. The tzaddik is a different avodah. By the tzaddik there is Ra. The Baal Tshuva says, no, I'm going to make from the Ra toiv. It's a different shlichus. It's a different avodah. It's not right or wrong. It's a different avodah. That's the chiddush of Yaakov. When he has a child who's struggling, Yaakov's avina avodah is not just, maybe I'll be nice, we'll make a mechitza, I'm going to make sure he's not going to affect me. Yaakov Avinu sees it only as an opportunity for transformation. Yaakov Avinu will not let it go. I will not let you go until I find that you are emes toiv and kedusha. With such an attitude, of course, mitase shlema, you can't have a bad kid. You typhus. Take a Yosef. Yeah. The brothers were very upset at Yosef. They didn't like Yosef. Balach he's going to take over the whole world. Everybody's going to bow down to him. The sun and the moon, the stars, the shivs. Vayikanu boyachav. V'aviv shamar es hadavar. The brothers were jealous. Yaakov Avinu preserved. He preserved shamar es hadavar. What's the difference? Yaakov Avinu mitase shlema. He saw in Yosef what other people didn't see. Other people looked at Yosef, the black sheep of the family. Busy, he's ambitious. He's going to take over the world. Evil gains to the goyim. And Yosef said, this child has a special shlichus. It's a different approach. It's not they're wrong, he's right. It's who you are. It's a neshama thing. You can't change your neshama. Avraham and Yitzchak's avodah was the avodah to create and bring out Hashem in the world, and affect people as much as they can. But primarily their dealing with Ra was, don't allow the Ra to affect you, or to affect the people who are connected with Kedusha. And that's big. That's big. It's called boundaries, borders. Yaakov Avinu goes one step deeper. Vayeitzei charana. Yaakov says there's a charan, I'm going to show that charan can also be transformed. Therefore, with every child is mitase shlema. Let's take a look at footnote number 14. Big question. Va'avda Avraham megayer. It says Avraham Avinu converted people. Rashi says in Parshas Lecha, hanefesh asher asu b'charan. It comes from Bereshis Rabbah, it comes from Zohar. Uberambam hilchas avodah zarah perek aleph halacha gimel. We learned this Rambam together. You remember what the Rambam says? Vayikru sham b'shem Hashem kelo elam asher niskaptzu elav alofim u'revav v'eim anshe beis Avram v'shasa b'lib meikon agad laza. Avram influenced and he gathered thousands, myriads of people. These are all the people of the house of Avram, and he implanted in them the great fundamental truth of Hashem. Emes. But none of it lasted. Where are all the people that Avram converted? Where are all the people that Avram influenced? The Meiri, I believe, says in his Akdamat Pirkei Avos that Avram Avinu affected half of humanity, or close to half of humanity, or more than half of humanity. What happened to them? Nothing. They all disappeared. Just like Yishmael also did tshuva, but it didn't remain. Only Bnei Yisrael, the children of Yisrael, maintained the identity and they became a nation that was dedicated and became aware of Hashem. Ein Rambam Sham, as the Rambam discusses in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Perek Aleph at length. One of the great chassidim of the Baal HaTanya was a Jew known as Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Epstein. He was the Rav of Hamil, or as the Russians like to say, Gomel. He was a big gon. He wrote quite a few Sfarim. One of them is Chana Ariel, Parshas Vayetzei. So he's known as Rabbi Isaac Hamiler. Rabbi Isaac Hamiler, he was the Rav of Hamil. He was, to the son, he was, then there was he came from the world of known then as the Misnagdim, the opponents to Chassidus. And he used to finish Shas a whole year. Every year he would finish the whole Shas and make a siyum. Erev Pesach, he was a b'chor, he made a siyum on the whole Shas. When he became a chassid from the Baal HaTanya, his father, who was a chashiv yid, an erlich yid, but very opposed to Chassidus, sat shiva. When kids would convert, Rachmana litzlan, parents would sit shiva. So when he became a chassid, it was considered like he joined a cat, he joined a cult. I don't know if you know this. There were parents who sat shiva on their children. Some prominent parents. He tore his clothes and he sat shiva 7 days that his child died. He spiritually could give a chassid to the Baal HaTanya. Little did he know that his child had chiyas hamesim. He thought he should have made Sheva Brachas 7 days, but he sat shiva. It was devastating for him. The next Erev Pesach, he saw that his son made a siyum on Shas. He thought, he heard, you're going to the Baal HaTanya, there's no learning anymore, there's no Judaism, it's all over. So he sat shiva. He realized the next set of Pesach, his son made a siyum on Shas. He calmed down. Somebody told me the other day that Rav Kook said once about the Isaac Hamala that he's the Bakiva Eger of Chassidus, Bakiva Eger of Chabad Chassidus. Interesting. So he writes, the Isaac Hamala writes, Al Yidei Aveidosi Shel Avraham Avinu Olav Hashem Leidil Libnei Adam Mibnei Noach Tiva Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'chinas Keil Olam Lefi Shah Ki Loi Niskaimu Bezoyse Amunah Vayidiyah Ki Im Beis Achar Shel Avraham Avinu Olav Hashem. The avodah of Avram was to tell everybody about Hashem, and nonetheless, it did not endure. When Avraham Avinu passes away, they're all gone. We don't see them. We don't hear about them. Avram had this whole melucha, this whole spiritual empire. The Rambam says tens of thousands of people. And remember, there were much less people alive then than today. This is much earlier in history. We're talking about almost 4,000 years ago. Avraham Avinu creates a revolution. But what happens? It doesn't last. Why not? Because he didn't transform them completely. He affected them. He influenced them. They were drawn in. But you can draw people in. You can mesmerize them. You can affect them. You can make changes. But ultimately, when you're gone, it doesn't last. Why? You all know. You have been at events or been with people and you were mesmerized. You were like, wow, this is amazing. This is amazing. But then comes Corona and you go back to your loch, to your hole, and it's over. Why? Because it didn't transform me. It affected me, it inspired me, it uplifted me, but ultimately, it's not transformation. Avraham Avinu affected all these people, but to say that they were metamorphosized, they became new people, no. And ultimately, as time went on, Avraham Avinu passed away, or he went away, it fizzled out, you go back. Yaakov, that would not happen. Yaakov, whatever he touches, he transforms. They become holy. Mitosoi shlema. Not just Yishmael gets affected. Yaakov transforms the Ra. Like the Balchuvas, Doinis, Naso like Azachias. He redefines the Ra. Charoin Av Shal Makam. That's a whole different avodah. He continues, he says in footnote 14, Loharim Likkutei Sichos Chelekei Shema Shekasav Rashi Avram Megayres Hanoshim Besadam Megayres Hanoshim Yeshleimer De'ena Kavana Legayres Mamish V'Shini Amitzias Shalom Kim Mashechlis Nachas Kam Fershchina. It says Avram was Megayer them. So it's explained elsewhere. Giyur doesn't mean conversion like conversion. Mamish Geirus. It means, before Matan Torah, what does Geirus mean? He brought them into the wings of the Shechina, but it didn't last. L'chayrev shelavari gam al pia yadua shen hager yesh ben nitzis shal neshama de kedusha gam koydem shen is gayer. Reit shuvas maram in Rottenburg. Val pisa moving diuk loshen chazal bekam mekoym is ger shen is gayer v'loy goy shen is gayer v'kiyetz b'za chida b'sefer midbar kadmas. V'im kein masha avram megayer v'chuli en ze inyan bitter v'hepach ha-klipa l'kedusha. Aval einay de b'cholis hapchach kayetz b'za reiz a b'diyas a bitter na-nitzis l'kedusha shabbat. The Lubavitcher Rebbe wants to suggest something and say, I'll explain to you the difference. It says, gewaltige word from the Chidah. Whenever you see in Shas mentioning a ger, it says ger shen is gayer, a convert who converted. Well, it's not a convert who converted. It should have said goy shen is gayer. Just like you say katan shen is gadol. A child who became an adult, who became bar mitzvah. You don't say gadol shen is gadol, or it says eved shen is tachrer. You don't say ben choyden shen is tachrer. A slave who was emancipated. Besides by a Gentile, it doesn't say goy shen is gayer. It says ger shen is gayer. Ger shen is gayer. It's not a ger shen is gayer. Goy shen is gayer. Ger shen is gayer. Katan shen eladame. So the Chidah says even before he converted, he was a ger. The reason a ger is compelled to convert, was felt what do you have to become a Jew for? Because before that he was a Jew. There was a nitzitz, there was a spark of a Jewish soul there. That's what it says. He has a nitzitz of an neshama de kedusha even before the giyur. It's not a goy shenis guy. It's a ger shenis guy. If that's the case, so then when Avraham is megayer, he's not changing it. He's just bringing out the nitzitz, but the nitzitz was there already. So he's not transforming the ra because it's a ger shenis guy. He's not transforming the clipper versus Yaakov Avinu. But the Rebbe says this is not a real vart. This is not a true vart, because that's what ishapcha means. Ishapcha always means to reveal and liberate and be mevared the nitzutz of kedusha that exists in everything. So you could say that about all transformations. So when we say Yaakov transforms, it's the same concept. It's bringing out the kedusha that's there, which is trapped and concealed. Because ultimately, even in ra, there's a nitzutz of kedusha. So therefore, if we say that giyur means literally giyur, then it would also be ishapcha. That's why the Rebbe says that giyur by Avraham wasn't mamish giyur. Siv Gimel. V'liyosh ba'avodos Avraham v'Yitzchak l'nez barar adayim mitzius shel arasha v'plishtim v'chuli v'rakis nagdusei batlo. Harei hoysa gam efshari she'etzem mitziusam v'aloi toiv shel b'neiim afilu yishmal v'esav yishoyer b'takve v'lo yizbarer ba'avodosam shel Vayeitzei. V'adara b'yotzem imenu sheyotzem b'shechusam kol she'il avodosam v'kedushasam. Ela shehem gam lo yisnagdu l'nyonei Vayeitzei v'lo yifriyu esam ba'avodosam. Al kol panim arei mohusa klipa atzma. Kashen ein lo shaychus l'kedusha ve'ein menagedes lo yinaga ba avodosam shel Avraham v'Yitzchak v'im kein ein mitziusik shel atzma mushlelos mitzad avodosam zu. What do we learn from here? Since the avodah of Avraham and Yitzchak did not transform the mitzius of Ra that they came in contact with, for example, the plishtim, etc., the opposition was neutralized. The opposition was dealt with. It was nullified. But it wasn't transformation. So therefore, there was the possibility, even in their own children, that there was no transformation. So therefore, the etzem, the core reality of their children, Yishmael and Esav, which had elements that were not fully positive and were not fully aligned with Hashem. So it was possible that even the core mitzias of their own children would remain as is and would retain its toxic components and would not be transformed and refined and sublimated through the avodah of their parents. On the contrary, yatsu, they would go off, they would separate themselves. True, they did not bother their parents. Their parents made sure that there was no active opposition from Yishmael and Esav to Avraham and Yitzchak. They did not disturb their avodah. That's true. But nonetheless, they did not remake them. They did not transform them. Therefore, we learn from here that the mohus of klippa itself, the mohus of negativity itself, when it's not opposing kedusha and doesn't have a relationship with kedusha, Avraham and Yitzchak don't necessarily transform it, and therefore the mitzias of Ra can remain even in the world of Avraham and Yitzchak. They will not negate it. If it opposes, they will fight it, they will combat it, or they will influence. But if it's not connected to them, not in the positive and not in the negative, it could remain. And they're fine. Because their avodah is not the transformation of Ra. Their avodah is the cultivation of Tov and to make sure the Ra is not affecting them. Let's take a look by Avraham. Nisyashav b'toich b'nei Ches. He lived among the people of Ches. He dwelled among them. In the beginning of Chayesara, they say, you're a Nisi Elokim, you're a prince of God among us. They recognize his dignity. They recognize his specialty and his sacredness. They call him a prince of God, and they say, and you're among us, you're living with us. No. You have Avraham Avinu living in your community, in your neighborhood. Vera mensch. No, bekolza, loipalza, bem shematzum yabchulatayv. Nonetheless, this did not affect them to be transformed. Mention, they respect him. Yaakov Avinu was also by Lavan, and Lavan wasn't But Lavan had an issue with Yaakov. The Bnei Ches respected Avraham. But they're not transformed. They remain Bnei Ches gam la'acheres yashvus b'nei. They remain Bnei Ches even afterwards. Why do they remain in Bnei Ches? Gam la'acheres yashvus b'nei. And he says in 21, Re'ei told us Chav Zayin Mem Vav. I assume what he means over there is that Rivka told Yitzchak, Katzti b'chayim mipnei b'nei Ches. Katzti b'chayim mipnei b'nei Ches. I am disgusted because of the daughters of Ches. And therefore I will not be able to live. Lama lichaim, I will not be able to live if Yaakov Avinu marries one of the Bnei Ches. That's what he says in 21. The 8 told us Chav Zayin. V'tomer Rivka el Yitzchak, katzti b'chaya, I'm disgusted from Bnei Ches. What's pshat? Im leikeach Yaakov ish me Bnei Ches kelem Bnei Sod, it's lama lichayim. What's pshat? Avraham Avinu was there in the seal came out of Yeah, they respected him, they liked him, they gave him a kaver. Okay, they wanted a lot of money. But to say they were transformed, they weren't transformed. Avraham Avinu was living among them, he's living among them. They can have good relationships as neighbors. Avraham Avinu did his thing, and they said, Avraham. But me, it's not going to affect. Adkan. Adkan. So you could be sitting, Avraham Avinu was in your midst, loy naga v'loy paga, katzti b'chaim nebnei Ches. V'gam ma shenenu lo bakashasa b'mechinas manas hamachpeila, hadei zed actually yifriu loy b'bitzua inyan of hu, aval mohusam shalem loy nebchel l'metzias shel kedusha. They agree to his request, they'll sell him the maras hamachpeila. They won't bother him, and they'll be agreeable. And if they could help him, of course, for a couple of dollars, they'll help him. They're not here to fight him and make a war. MS. They'll allow him and they'll respect him, and they'll even take pride in it. They'll even tell Avraham. But to say that their mohus is affected, they become real Talmidim, real children of Avraham, not. And even all the people that Avraham was Mekarev didn't last, as we learned before from the Rambam and Rabbi Isaac Hamel and Chana Ariel Parshas Vayetzei. So here you have the classic model. There's Klippa right now, Avraham Avinu. They're touched by it. They certainly respect him. They like him. But I'm going to remain Bnei Ches. This is a fascinating idea. You can have Tachlis Hagdusha, Avos in a Merkava right near you, Lo Naga V'Lo Paga. And Avraham Avinu has good relations with them. He says, Ger v'soyshav anochi imachem. I live with you. I'm still a ger. I'm still an alien. Masheket b'avedasa shel Yaakov shetachlisa levader v'lafech lezacher kamas in yonei ha'olam shemitzad ha'klipa v'sitrachena hainu shaba'avedasa nishlelas gam etzem mitzius shel hara l'chein ha'isem mitasa shlema. The avodah of Yaakov is different. If he comes to a place, that place has to change. It's very different avodah. When Yaakov can just deal with the klippa being klippa, you don't bother me, live and let live. No. Live and make live. Not live and let live, live and make live. The avodah of Yaakov is levada, to refine, to transform, to elevate, even the whole world, the world itself. That which is klippa and sitrachra, what he doesn't come in contact with, but what he comes in contact with is never going to be the same. That's his avodah. Vayelech charana, he goes into the world of charan, charoin, av shal makom, and that's where he builds his family. He doesn't build his family in Eretz Yisrael. Unlike Avraham Avinu, unlike Yitzchak Avinu. When he is somewhere, it gets transformed. By him, mitase shlema. Don't such a thing, he has a child, and the child is, black sheep in the family. No. When I'm done with you, you're going to be the tzaddik hadar, mitase shlema. The way he looks at the child, he sees a different child. He sees the potential for kedusha, mitase shlema. And that's the pshat Yaakov tikkun tfilas arvis. Avraham was Mesaken Shachris, Yitzchak Mincha. Shachris, the sun is rising. The sun has just risen. It's light outside. Mincha, it's still light, afternoon. Yaakov tikkun tfilas arvis. This is the tefillah of darkness. Vayeitzei Yaakov be'eshav vayelech haran. What's the next pasuk? Vayivga ba'mokim vayolin sham kivo hashemesh. He encounters Hashem after sunset. The Gemara says in Brachas, Yaakov tikkun tfilas arvis. Yaakov takes the night and he transforms it into a tefillah. Tefillah is miloshin chibur ha'toifel klei cheres. Naftulei elikim niftalti. Tefillah means connection. He takes the night and he turns it into a connection. It's a whole beautiful sfas emes about this. Yaakov takes the night of Ma'ariv, tefillah's arvis he takes night, choshech, and he turns it into a relationship. Like the Baal Teshuvah, zdoinis nasalei kazachias. He doesn't look at darkness and say, okay, you don't disturb me, I won't disturb you. There's Yoim and Ma'avir Yoim, Evi Loyla, Vayera, Vayivoiker, Yoim Echad. He's Megala the Achdus and Erev also. That's the Avodah of Yaakov. Therefore, every child continues his path. There's no child who's excluded. The Gemara says in Tainis, Yaakov in Olay Meis, Ma'azare B'chayim, Afu B'chayim. His children are alive, he's also alive. Asks the Rebbe Chavav once, Avraham also, Yitzchak also, but there's something unique about Yaakov. Yaakov Leimes, because Avraham, part of his Zerah went to Yishmael. Part of his Zerah of Yitzchak went to Esav. By Yaakov, Zaroi B'chaim, the Rebbe teaches Zaroi, Yedin Nekuda from sein Zerah. Each one of his descendants that captures the Zerah, the seed, the sperm of Yaakov, the procreative substance of Yaakov Avinu, B'chaim remains alive. Atam adveikim Hashem alekechem chayim kol chamayim mitasir shleima. By Yaakov Avinu, there's no choshech. When he sees choshech, it's an opportunity to transform it into mitasir shleima. Hu b'chayim, zaroi b'chayim. Every one of his children that has his koiches, koichi v'roshis only, the zera is the koich of the person, like the Rambam says in Hilchos Deis. B'chayim remains connected to life. Dalit. We now come to the answer on the question. Al pizeh yuvon. Mashavram v'yitzak harsu b'risim Avimelech v'yishlimu yimayadei hashvua. Ki tachlis shel shvu krisus bris kazuare yulifel b'chol toikef al kol echad me'atzdadim shelo yisnagid l'sheni v'lo yiskoited v'yilchem emay v'hi haloi hoyse kavanosam shel Avraham v'yitzak amashin nishbu Avimelech v'karsim me'es abris shelo yisnagid lehem v'lo yafriyem ba'aveidosam aval me'idach ein inyana shel shvu krisus abris lifel sheni b'muhusi shel Avimelech ol havchil mitzvah shel gedusha. Now we'll understand why Avraham and Yitzchak could make a treaty and a covenant with Avimelech and make peace with him through a shvuah. What was the purpose of the oath with Avimelech? What was the purpose of the covenant? It was in order to impress and give this covenant validity and strength that each one of the sides should stop bothering the other. Avimelech wanted Avraham and Yitzchak shouldn't interfere into his business, and they wanted Avimelech should make sure that nobody interferes into their business. There should be no wars, no quarrels. It's like a peace treaty between two countries that were enemies. What's the point? The point is live and let live. How friendly will we become? We may be very friendly. We may be not so friendly, but the point is let's have clear boundaries, live and let live. And that was the point of Avraham and Yitzchak. Why did they accept this covenant? Why did they accept this oath? They wanted Avimelech should not oppose them. Avimelech should let Avraham and Yitzchak be the avos of the Shechina, of the Sein and Merkavah, Shamas of Atzilus. He should not interfere their avodas Hashem. The point of the Shvuah and the Krisus Bris was not to change Avimelech in his core, to metamorphosize the core of Avimelech and to turn him into Kedusha. That wasn't the point. The point was Avimelech should be a person who respects Avraham and Yitzchak and lets them live and lets them be. Not that he should be transformed. That wasn't the point. It was like a peace treaty between two nations. As he says in 23, we see this from the fact that Yitzchak has to renew the covenant, and even Yaakov thought he has to do it, and that's why he went away from Beersheva. Why? If Avimelech is a transformed person, what do you have to make a new Krisus Bris? He became a chassid of Avraham Avinu. He didn't become a chassid of Avraham Avinu. He remained Avimelech, Melech Plishtim, just like Neches, Nesiya Lekim Ata B'Seichenu, you're Avraham Avinu, Ich bleib Ches. And that's the difference. You could sometimes be close to a tzaddik, you can gain from the tzaddik, you can grow from the tzaddik, but loy naga v'loy paga, me, myself, I'm not going to change. I'm going to remain an Avimelech, I'm going to remain B'nei Ches, katzti b'chayu ne'mnei Islam ali chayim. Avraham Avinu is living among you, he's living among you. You made a treaty with Avraham and Yitzchak, a treaty, they're good people, Avraham and Yitzchak. You may even donate a check for their organization. Yeah, a big check for Avraham Avinu, a big check for Yitzchak Avinu. But you want me to be transformed? So sly. That's nicht. A treaty, yeah. A peace, yeah. I like you. You're chashav a man. You're chashav a person. Psst. It's a different avodah. Yaakov. Amnam calls away from avedosam shel Avraham v'Yitzchak. And Amashenkin be Yaakov. By Yaakov, this doesn't work. When Yaakov touches klippah, it becomes gold. Yaakov is live and make live. Be a mechayechayim. Mechayechayim mitl mechayim. Calls away from Avraham v'Yitzchak. Mashenkin be Yaakov shel yosh from avedosam hayu b'shlilas metzias a klippah. Aydei skafia v'ishapche shel klippah v'sitrachena haday lo yochel lichres bris ulahashlam im Avimelech v'shenimtza b'tziyurayu. Mitzad avodah of Yitzchak, mitzad avodah of Yaakov, he cannot make a peace treaty with Avimelech. He cannot allow Avimelech to remain in his tziyur intact. What Yaakov touches, what Yaakov comes in contact with, has to become Kedusha. Mitosei shleima. Yaakov can't touch on Esav and let it be Esav. He can't touch on Yishmael and let it be Yishmael. Yaakov's avodah is to transform the world. Vayelech run to be megalas doinus nasal like his achis. Yaakov can't come in contact with Avimelech, and Avimelech should walk out of the encounter untouched, unmoved. No, once you finish an encounter with Yaakov, you're never the same. I once read an article, it just reminded me, from Geulah Cohen. You know who Geulah Cohen was? Geulah Cohen was a Chaver Knesset in Israeli parliament for decades. She passed away not long ago. She was in her 90s. Geulah Cohen, she was a very, very interesting personality. She was a fighter for the Jewish people, and she had very strong traditional feelings. I once read an article she wrote either in Ma'ariv or Yediot Achronot. These are Israeli secular newspapers many years ago, I believe in the late 60s or in mid-60s. She came to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and she was there for a few hours. And she wrote up the encounter. An incredible, incredible article, something special. But I remember her ending. She said, I have sat with many people in my life. I think she was a partisan also. She fought in the war against the Nazis. She survived. She was a very colorful person, a courageous person, and she was a personality. And a very genuine, a real Jew, very committed to her people, to Israel. And so she says, I've sat with a lot of people. She said, you sit with a chacham, a brilliant man, you leave the meeting, he remains brilliant and you remain dumb. You sit with a great leader, you leave the meeting, he remains to be a great leader and you remain a victim or a simple person. You sit with a brilliant artist, a brilliant musician, a greatest architect, a great author. It's wonderful, you're inspired, you're affected, but you leave the meeting, he remains the great talent and you remain the simpleton. She says, but then you sit with a maimin, with a real believer, and you go out of the meeting and you're also changed. Ki ha-maimin gam bach, because the real believer believes in you too. So you go out of the meeting changed. And she said, Lubavitcher Rebbe is a chacham, and he's brilliant, and he's a manig, but most importantly, he's a maimin. And the maimin believes in you too. It was such a powerful idea. I can come out of a meeting with you, and you're a great, great person, and I respect you. But who am I? I am YY. Or I could leave the meeting, and I'm never the same. Because a part of you, you have now given me. It became part of me. That's the difference. Yaakov Avinu's avodah was of a different avodah. He can't just make a treaty with Avimelech. Avraham and Yitzchak could, but Yaakov's avodah is that when he sees Klippa, it has to be redone, it has to be remade through Iskafia, which is subduing it, or Ishabcha, which is transforming it. There's different levels in Yaakov also. He cannot just make peace with Avimelech the way Avimelech remains Avimelech. He made a treaty with Lavan. He made a treaty with Lavan. Take a look in 24. Yaakov made a treaty with Lavan in Vayeitzei. It says, we're not going to pass. They made a mechitza, gala vonim galed, a mound of stones. You're not going to pass. I'm not going to pass to harm each other. But for business relations, yeah. And what's the concept of business relations? It's ultimately to elevate the sparks that exist by love and also. So Yaakov Avinu would not just create a mechitza, you live and I live and there's no relationship. No, there's no negative relationship. A positive relationship there's going to be. I'm going to search to transform you. ובזה יבוא המשך הכוסף ויצא יעקב באר שבע וילך הרונה, לפי פירוש המדרש באר שבע פירוש מבאר של שבוע, כי עניין של כי יציאס מבאר של שבוע עניין מה שמצד הבידוסי לא היה יכול להשלים מציאס הרע בעולם כנ"ל, ולכן לנשאר במקומו בארץ אשר אין השם אלוקיך בה, כי אם וילך הרונה אחרי נפשל מקום בעולם לברר להפחיל לקדושה. Now we have a whole new geschmack in the Midrash. Vayeitzei Yaakov מבאר שבע. What's מבאר שבע? מבאר של שבוע. I cannot make a shua with Avimelech. Avraham and Yitzchak made a shua. That's their avodah. I'm not Avraham and Yitzchak. I cannot make a peace treaty with Avimelech in which he remains Avimelech. He remains in his tzir of Melech Plishta. If there's a relationship with Yaakov, it's mitas shlema. You have to be transformed. So Vayeitzei Yaakov Be'er Shava. Why? Because Vayelech Harana. Vayelech Harana is not stam. Extra words in the pasuk. Vayelech Harana explains it because he cannot make a peace treaty with Avimelech because he cannot make peace with a metzias of Ra. If he comes in contact with Ra, he has to transform the Ra. He has to redefine it. And therefore, he cannot live with Avimelech in this way. It's not going to work. So therefore, he leaves the Shvuah. So he doesn't stay in his place. because that's not the avoid of Yaakov to remain in his place, and let Avimelech remain in his place, and we will have a treaty. Vayelech Haran, he goes into Haran, to transform it into holiness. Now you might say, so why didn't he go to Avimelech and transform him? But Avimelech also has to be ready. Right? Avimelech has to be ready. The avoid of Yaakov Avinu is Vayelech Haran. What he touches has to become gold. Not live and let live, live and make live. But the Makabel has to be open to it. Just like with Lavan, he didn't just transform Lavan. It's a big avoid, and at the end, Lavan remained Arami Oivedavi, a deceiver, a thief. But mitzad avoid of Yaakov, he can't just say, okay, Avimelech, you be you, and I'll be me, and our relationship will be, you retain your identity unchanged. If Yaakov Avinu is in this relationship, it affects the klippa, it affects the da. There's engagement that requires transformation. Al pize yuvan gamash Avraham Yitzchak lechashul l'shavel Avimelech ime yosh taydei masha b'simchas b'ni ki be'emes loy hashvu atzma shehi dargas avedasam hi hasibel liikov knisasam shel bnei Yisrael Eretz Yisrael ela shemitzad avedasam ba'ofen shel shvu knisas b'nisiv Avimelech nishara adayin mitzias haklipa b'takfa v'yeshusa v'chol zman shara da'il b'hamadav v'esanai harei ze meniya v'ikov l'biyasan shel bnei Yisrael la'aretz. V'dafka la'acharei galusa shel Yaakov b'chareinav shel makom ba'olam v'avedase b'birid inyani aklipa v'efucham l'kedusha yichel aliyah simchas b'ni b'gulasim b'knesasim shel bnei Yisrael Eretz Yisrael. So now we answered why the Avraham and Yitzchak were not afraid of a shvur with Avimelech. Yaakov was, because mitzad his avodah, it won't work. It simply won't work. He cannot do it. He cannot tolerate it. It just can't happen. Either I transform you, or you're not yet ready for transformation. Or I still have to work on myself to be able to transform you. But this relationship of Yishmael and Esav is not going to work by Yaakov Avinu. If you're my child, it's going to be mitasei shlema. Now we come to the final explanation. They weren't concerned that they're delaying the simcha of the child. They're not going to go into Eretz Yisrael for 7 generations. Avraham and Yitzchak didn't delay it. It's not the shvuah that delayed it. They made a shvuah. This is the diagram of their avodah. The shvuah just represents the state of the world. That's the vart. Mitzad their avodah, where they could make peace with Avimelech, a shvuah with Avimelech, it means that klippa retains its yeshes. It retains its arrogance. It retains its hubris. When the Ra is so powerful, it doesn't allow the Jewish people to go into Eretz Yisrael, to transform Eretz Yisrael into a dir lo yizbarach, into Eretz HaKodesh. That's the vart. The shvuah represented the fact. It's not Avraham and Yitzchak didn't care about the Jewish people going to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, we'll make peace with Avimelech. Who cares? Our children won't be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. It's much deeper than that. The shvuah was symptomatic of a certain state of consciousness, what the world was ready for. We cannot transform the klippa. We can make peace with it in the sense that we don't allow it to transform us, but we can't transform you. I won't allow you to change me, but I'm not going to change you. Yishmael won't bother me. Esav won't bother me, but I'm not going to change you. And the klippa will retain its yeshus, its arrogance. In this state, the Jews can't go into Eretz Yisrael. Yaakov Avinu changes the model. He goes into Charam. He doesn't say, I'm not going to change you, but you won't change me. No. You won't change me, and I'll change you because we're really one. Because Einoid Mulvadai. He changes the klippa. He doesn't allow for klippa to remain in its yeshus. Now there could be simchas b'ni. Now the Jews could go in to Eretz Yisrael. Now there could be a real geula, a real redemption. That's why he says in 28, the lashon of the Midrash is masha simchas b'ni. It doesn't say doicha, it doesn't say ma'akev. Because it's not that they were doicha the knissa. That's not. They weren't doicha, they weren't ma'akev it. It represented the fact that the Jews are not ready yet to go into Eretz Yisrael. They still need time. It wasn't yet ready. They weren't ready for it. It's not that they were doicha or ma'akev it. That's why the expression is masha b'simchas b'ni. It's delaying the simcha of b'ni. Vav. This gives us perspective on the future history. The Gemara says in Psachim that Avraham Avinu called the Beis HaMikdash the Har HaMoriah a mountain. Yitzchak called it a field. Yaakov Avinu called it a home. And the Mefarshim explained, the Maharsha explains in Masechta Psachim that this refers to the 3 Batei Mikdash. Avraham is the first Beis HaMikdash, Yitzchak is the second, Yaakov is the third Beis HaMikdash, which is biased, permanent, fixed. Because the ultimate Geulah comes through the avodah of Yaakov. Yes, there's a Gevaldik Mile in Avraham and Yitzchak that you retain your boundaries and you make sure that Klippa doesn't affect you, but you also don't affect it. I don't bother you, you don't bother me. But that means the klipa remains in its taikif. The ultimate avodah of the Jewish people in our Golus is Vayeitzei Charon, to redo everything, to make it ois charon afshal makom. It should be a dirilo yizbarach. The klipa should be transformed, and that elevating the world and elevating our own ran, elevating each of our children and each of our loved ones and our communities in the whole world. Mitasei shleima. What does this do? It allows for the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, the Beis Hamikdash of Yaakov, not just a mountain and not just a field, but a bayis which will be revealed with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. Mesichas Shabbos Vayeitzei Yud Kislev Tafshin Chaf Vav. I know it's late, but let me see if there's questions. We'll take some questions. Avraham and Yitzchak didn't transform all their children. Yaakov did. Avraham is chesed, Yitzchak is gvura. How did Yaakov do this? Is this connected with Tiferes? It is, yeah. Yaakov was Tiferes, which is a synthesis of chesed and gvura. Because if you just chesed or gvura, you can't transform. It's more one-dimensional. Yaakov combined and synthesized. It was the right combination of hot and cold, bitter and sweet, like the coffee you spoke about. And by the combination we call Tiferes, he was the only one of the others to have wholesome children, despite their deficiencies, and to have a lasting impact. Yes, very well. You explain that whatever Yaakov touches becomes gold. Yet after many years with Lavan comes running after his son-in-law and his daughters, grandchildren, and he's upset at them and he wants to hurt them. Only Hashem came to him, did he not harm him? Lavan was not transformed at all. Well, the bottom line is, as I said, also with Avimelech, he left Avimelech. There's certain things, sometimes the klipa is not allowing itself yet to be transformed. It's not ready yet, or you're not ready to transform it. Right? Yaakov doesn't transform Avimelech. He leaves Avimelech. He's not going to make a shvuah with Avimelech because Yaakov has to transform the klipa. In the right time, Avimelech will also be transformed. Lavan will also be transformed. Sometimes the situation apparently is not yet ripe for that, or you're not ripe for it. But when Yaakov is going to engage in a relationship, it's going to be in a way that the Ra is going to be transformed. I mean, we have to think about this. You're asking, why didn't he transform Lavan? Why didn't he transform Avimelech? Stay in Beersheba and transform Avimelech. In other words, he realized that his relationship with Avimelech is going to be in a way that I live and you live and we retain our boundaries. I don't affect you, you don't affect me. And Mitzad Yaakov is avodah that doesn't work. Mitzad Avraham and Yitzchak, it does work. I'll do a little commercial. Last night we did the second part of the Rebbe's Siyum HaMaseches Eruvin. The first night we did the halachic part, and last night we did the chassidus part. I thought it'll be shorter, but it went for a little more than 2 hours. So we finished close to Chatzos Halayla. So those of you who have some time, make sure it's double speed. If you could do triple speed, matov, but at least double speed. Because if you do it on regular speed, you're going to have to do it all day. You can go to Kollel. But those who still have to, pay bills, so you do it on double speed. But I think you will be enriched by the content of the Rebbe's Siyum on Eruvin, even if you didn't learn Eruvin. But the messages and the themes are very, very powerful, very moving. It also teaches you how to look at a piece of Gemara and a Mishnah.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.